All right. Well, thanks so much, Will, for presenting to Locally Optimistic today on giving better presentations. So very meta there. For folks who are attending, one, if you're in a place where you can turn on your video, please do. It's much easier to speak to people rather than speak to a bunch of Zoom screenshots or names. So if you can, please do turn it on. If you can't, that's fine too. We're going to be using the Slack today instead of the Zoom chat for conversation and questions. And I'm going to drop that in the chat, but we'll be using Meetup Better Presentations. If you have any questions at any point in time, please do drop them in the chat. You don't have to hold them to the end or anything. And then we'll get to them as we go. So with that, over to you, Will. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Can you make me a co-host or give me the permission to do that?
Good. We've never had anyone share screen on these things before. So I've never had to do that before. There you go. See if that works.
Great. So that's the first tip is to from doing good presentations is to show up early and test your audio visual as you go. So can everyone see that and hear me clearly now?
Good to go.
Awesome. So I'm going to be talking about how to make worse presentations today. So I've got 13 tips on how to make ineffective presentations, which if you want to take away the wrong message could be construed as how to make a good presentation and be more effective at presenting. So again, feel free to put any questions in the Slack channel and I'll keep an eye on those as we go and answer them at the end. So first tip for giving bad presentations, don't think about your audience and desired outcome. A good presentation has 3 features which you want to avoid. Target audience, who is going to be seeing the presentation, the message, what you want them to take away from the presentation. That can be education, information, a decision, sometimes just inspiration. And then the third important feature is content that supports the message, how you communicate that desired message. So if you want to give a good presentation, those are your tips. But if you want to give it if you want to do the least ineffective presentation possible, then don't do any of that. So first tip, avoid outline and structure. Good presentation should be comprehensible and well-structured. So if you want to do a bad presentation, don't tell them what you're going to tell them. Don't tell them it, and then don't tell them what you told them. So just take all the classic good presentation advice, flip it on its head. So second tip, use default templates and don't bother with quality. If you're consistent with your formatting, that shows that you care about your audience. And if you care about your audience, you risk giving a good presentation. Second is attention to details. Typos and inconsistencies detract from what you want to communicate. So make sure that you have lots of typos and inconsistencies. And third part of this tip is leave stuff in the default template in. If it's good enough to be in the template, it's good enough to be in your slides. Third tip, make really small font. The bigger your font is, the easier it is to read. And if people read your slides, they won't listen and your presentation will be bad. So smaller is better is worse. Imagine the fine print legal disclaimers that come with eye charts. If like BuzzFeed did eye charts that required warnings, like nobody could read that. So again, the smaller your font is, the harder it is to read, which makes for a worse presentation. That's what we want. So fourth tip, reading every single word on your slides is the only way to be sure that everyone gets every word on your slides and does not miss a single word. Reread if you miss important things. Reread if you miss important things. If the text is too small for you to read, which is bad, which is good, add detailed speaker notes and just read those. People with good eyesight will see what you're doing. Tip 5, make sure you pick a cool font. The font matters, and while legibility is important, looking good is much more important for giving a bad presentation. So if you want to give a bad presentation, pick a really cool font, even if it distracts from everything. Add animations. So again, looking cool distracts from effective communication. So use a lot of animations to make it so that your slides are confusing and distracting. Another tip, go too fast to show that you're high energy. The faster you present, the faster you can leave. just get your presentation done so that people will stop making you do presentations. If you give an effective presentation, people will often ask you to come back and present more. But if you give a bad presentation, no one will ask you to come back. So you're going fast. Tip 5, distracting data visualizations. Good charts and data can make your presentation more informative and credible. Don't do that. So just throw in charts that distract people. If you have charts, people will think you're doing good. See, again, another chart. Don't look too closely. And here we have, again, another line chart. See, high, low, trend looks up and to the right. Good. Don't use pie charts. You'll give yourself away as a data noob. So tip number 6 for giving bad presentations is to talk really slowly without energy. The slower you talk, the more serious people will think you are. If you talk fast and are passionate, people will think you're not serious. So to give bad presentations, talk slowly, and everyone will know that you are a boring person who takes things seriously, like a lawyer crossed with an accountant, a lawyer accountant. Make people think that you are a lawyer accountant with a bright career in local politics, and you will give the worst presentations that people have ever seen. So tip number 8, repeat content to bore your audience. So good charts and data make your presentation more informative and credible. So if you want to use data to make a presentation more effective, every chart and slide should support the message you want to communicate. So every visualization needs to support your message. If you use graphs that distract, again, that will make it so that people can't see what's going on, and you risk, successfully having an effective presentation. So again, use data thoughtfully to do a good presentation, or just throw stuff in there to do a bad presentation. Again, pie charts, at this point, everyone knows that pie charts are passé. So make sure you use things that are more advanced than a pie chart. Okay. Tip number 7, include memes to engage your audience. If you have a captive audience, you'll usually want to engage them so that they have more fun, because if they're having too much fun, that means that they won't be focused on the presentation and they won't take anything away from it. So if you want to do a bad presentation, include lots and lots and lots and lots of memes. So to really give a bad presentation, don't practice. So TED speakers spend several days or weeks practicing. You don't want to do that. If your audience didn't practice attending your presentation, it's not fair for you to invest more effort. So again, if you want to give a good presentation, practice, make sure you're confident in the material and delivery, and don't need anything like notes. So if you want to do a good presentation, lots of practice and preparation. For a bad presentation, don't practice. Your content won't stand for itself. Least effective presentation. So tip number 9 is to overclutter your slides. Clear slides, like we said earlier, are easy to read, which makes them effective for giving a good presentation. So you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that there's lots of content so that you've got maximum information density so that no one can see anything. So tip number 10 is to use jargon. If you use lots of jargon and technical terminology, it will be hard for people to understand you. And with acronyms and abbreviations, you can just start making stuff up and it'll look competent, but no one will understand anything. So for example, you could talk about discussing the ROI of Q1 DBA sprints on RDBMS ETL to SQL EDW for Turbo Encabulator BI versus dependency on DE's AI ML T-SQL ETL LOL to drive EBITDA ASAP. Got to talk about that quickly. So again, to give a bad presentation, use lots of jargon, acronyms, and abbreviations. If you want to do a good presentation, you want to be clear and concise and not overly reliant on acronyms and abbreviations and other terminology. So tip 11, don't finish with contact information. You don't want anyone to find you. And if you really want to give a truly bad presentation, you don't want to be there. So don't give people contact information, and someone's going to put your slides online, and then they'll put, they'll have your contact information there and people can find it. And again, it's just too much of a hassle. Don't do that. Don't say thank you and invite follow-ups. if you liked your audience, you would thank them. And if people think that you like them, they're more likely to think that your presentation is good. And again, we want to give a bad presentation, so don't do that. Tip 13, go over time. If you have an allotted amount of time, make sure that you go over and waste a lot of time, include lots of appendices and that sort of thing. So again, if you want to make an effective presentation, stick to your allotted time and be concise so that you can communicate what you want effectively. But again, we want to do a bad presentation, so make sure that you go over time and have lots of twisted convolutions and appendices. You can go backwards to touch on previous points. So that's how to give a very bad presentation. Definitely go over. So I'm going to get a little bit, this is on locally optimistic. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about data visualization and how to use data to give bad presentations. So I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here. There are a lot of great books on how to give bad data presentations. This handy guide from Alberto Cairo, How Charts Lie. Awesome book, lots of practical wisdom on how to do bad visualization. I think that Avoiding Data Pitfalls by Ben Jones is somewhat misnamed because it really should be how to create data pitfalls, at least for the purpose of giving bad presentations. And then on the more technical side, John Schwabish's Better Data Visualizations is everything you need to know about how to make good and thus bad data visualization. So definitely do your research and use some of their wisdom for making awful presentations. So I'm going to take some of those and distill them into 5 bonus tips to make your presentation worse. And those 5 tips are: use poorly designed charts, use dubious data in your charts, don't display enough data in your charts, conceal uncertainty with your charts, and use your charts to suggest misleading patterns. So those are the 5 special bonus tips for giving bad presentations with data visualization. So tip number 1, poorly design your charts. If you manipulate your chart axes, you can make it look like trends exist that don't actually exist. So as you can see here, if you look very closely, you'll note that the axes are scaled radically different here and that it is actually quite misleading. You can also use perspective, like 3D pie charts, to exaggerate numbers. A second example of how to avoid doing a clear bar chart in this case, if you want to make it clear, start from 0 or add a 0 break so that people can see that it's not actually a trend like that. So if you want to do it correctly, add a 0 break or start from 0. If you want to create a misleading graph, which will make your presentation worse, then definitely choose your axes very carefully to show exactly what you want to show. So the second tip for how to use data visualizations to make a bad presentation is to use dubious data. You don't want to cite any of your sources. You don't want to label any of your charts. And if the charts you're using come with labels, make sure to hide them, because your audience may read your labels and come away with a better understanding. So you don't want your audience to understand something because that would make it a good presentation. So definitely hide any inconvenient labels. And the third part of using dubious data is don't make your analysis reproducible. A lot of people these days, they're all in on good practices in the modern data stack. So dashboards are being fed by version controlled DBT models. And the problem with that is that you've got clear lineage and understanding of where the data came from and how it was transformed, all the way from source to chart. And that means that people can actually see where your data came from, which risks having your presentation be good. So again, you don't want to do that. Use Excel, lots of copying and pasting, just whatever it takes to get a chart. Ideally, you don't want anyone to be able to follow what you did. So again, tip 2, use dubious data for your charts. The third tip for using data visualization to make bad presentations is to not display enough data for your charts. If you use large numbers, big ass numbers, as the as Steve Wexler in the Big Book of Dashboards likes to say. Those big numbers are a great way to hide complexity. If you show a distribution, people get a better understanding of the data, which means your presentation will be better. And again, this is about doing the worst possible presentation. So don't show distributions, just try and summarize everything as much as possible. And if you have inconvenient outliers, just exclude them. For example, I took a survey on this presentation, and 100% of people surveyed that this presentation was going to be great. I excluded some outliers, so that makes it easier to get these good numbers. And if folks want, you can post in the chat about if you think this presentation is good or not, and we can recompute this. And again, if we exclude the right outliers, we can get whatever we want. So tip 4, hide uncertainty. You want to be confident that people don't come away from your presentation with anything. If people come away with anything from your presentation, that means that there is some effectiveness. And we want to make the least effective presentation. So if you hide uncertainty, you reduce the opportunity for people to get curious. So if you include lots of uncertainty ranges or error bars, your audience may get curious and start looking into things and come away more educated than they started, which is not what we want. So don't communicate uncertainty, because that may introduce ambiguity and people may actually come away with a nuanced understanding. Don't want that. So the 5th tip for how to use data visualization to make an ineffective presentation is to suggest misleading patterns. And this is closely related to the first tip of poorly designing your charts. But here the intent is to make your audience come away with an understanding that's wrong. So there's a great source called Spurious Correlations, which has lots of great ideas for how to do this. But basically, you want to use charts to suggest misleading patterns that may or may not be real. So it doesn't matter if there's actually any real trend or any real correlation, but you just want to make it look like there could be something. Because if it looks like there could be something, it means there could be something, and your audience can take the wrong message away, which means your presentation was ineffective. So that's all I've got for today. I'm going to go ahead and put links to all of this stuff in the chat. I did write a short sort of summary README of all of these tips if you want to review. So I've got those up on my GitHub, and just want to quickly plug that the Data Visualization DC Meetup group, which I help run, is having an event on accessibility in user experience and data visualization on December 14th. That's going to be virtual on Zoom. So if you want some real tips about how to do not presentations, but user experience and data visualization, how to do that well, this is going to be a fun event. So let me go ahead and take a look at the Slack and see what kind of questions we got.
Yeah, if people want to go ahead and post questions in the chat, remember we're using the Meetup Better Presentations channel. But if you have questions and you haven't typed it yet, that's okay. You can come off mute and ask Will now.
So hopefully that was more fun than confusing.
And Will, you'll post all of this in Slack as well, right?
Correct. And I have just put that in there, so folks should have access to these slides as well.
Great. Give people a minute in case they're typing.
Yeah, I had a particular question. The slide around acronyms got me thinking. Less around acronyms, but had more to do with attempting to explain a very difficult concept, like technical concept, to an executive audience, right? So it's something my team does quite a bit, and I'm curious if you have any strategies for helping to simplify that message or make it more digestible?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Mike. So it all, in my opinion, comes back to knowing your audience and knowing what the goal of your presentation is. So in this case, your audience is executives, and there's some reason that you're presenting to them.
Mhm.
In my experience with data, usually the desired outcome isn't actually that the executive understands all of the technical details, but that they understand enough to make an informed decision. So there, when it comes to jargon and systems, it's really a question of how much understanding do they need to actually make an effective decision? And can you provide that without going too deeply into systems? And that's really hard. I think effectively communicating, especially to non-data people, is one of the hardest things that most data practitioners do. So I guess for some specific tips, I think making sure that you understand the executive goals and why they would want to care. Because most executives, they've got too much going on, and the exact details of the system don't matter as much as knowing what the impact on their other priorities are. So if there's some opportunity to say build a new data integration, if you can frame that not in terms of what the exact technical details are and how many new tools and widgets and hours of engineering time you'll need, that part very important to you to actually get it done. But from the executive's perspective, you'll have more efficacy and more effective communication if you can align how that data new integration would support their goals in terms of providing better visibility so that they can further optimize some other part of the business, increasing revenue, decreasing reliability incidents. Mike, does that answer your question?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is instead of focusing on the actual technical specifics of the subject that you're talking about, you want to frame it in terms of the levers that the executive cares about pulling.
Correct.
Okay.
And one presentation technique, if you are giving a slide-based presentation, is to have a lengthy appendix. And so there you can basically put all of the technical details in an appendix so that, like a really good dashboard or data visualization, you can basically get sort of gradual, you can gradually zoom in and enhance on the amount of information communicated. So you could start with just a slide saying what the opportunity or problem is and what you recommend and why that would be a good course of action. And then if progressively a few more slides to show a couple of the details for why that's your recommendation or decision, and then an appendix with all the technical questions that an executive might get curious about if they're intrigued by the business case.
It's helpful. Thank you.
Will,
Right.
do you have any suggestions on how people can go about or should go about putting together presentations? Do you start with a slide deck? Do you start with writing things out? Any suggestions there?
Yeah. So again, it comes back to that very first bit, which is to think about your audience and what you want to communicate, and then what you need to communicate that. That said, for most presentations, a lot of us just sort of know this off the top of our head. If you've given a few presentations, you can do this pretty informally, but it can be helpful to list the personas that you want for your audience, actually write down what you think you want them to take away, and then from there, build an outline of what you need to say to support that. So I'm a big fan of doing written outlines before I start. So I'll make a sort of short list, usually bullet points of the whole structure of the logic, which is better for non-slide written documents. but can be very helpful for making sure that you understand what you want to communicate and why, and then boil that down to a set of slides. Though I will also say it can sometimes be an iterative process where you start with a written document and then start making slides, and the process of creating your slides and presentation can actually become a process of thinking out what you really want to say and how to effectively communicate that. So there's definitely a lot of iteration, but starting with an outline can be very helpful.
That sounds great. Well, Will, I think I don't see any other questions coming in, though it's possible people will watch the recording and drop some things in the chat. So if you want to keep an eye there, we will post this recording on YouTube so anyone can catch the replay. Will be in the Slack channel, but thanks so much for spending some time with us. A big thank you. Woo! And we hope folks have a good Wednesday.
Cool.
Well,
Thanks all.